Good evening, dear friends. This is Saturday, December the 10th, and we're in the Pine Gate Meditation Hall in Ottawa. And this is our 2016 Christmas gathering. So I have a somewhat gloomy title for the talk I'm going to offer to you this evening, that our world is burning. But let me start with something much more positive. You've all heard of the movie star Leonardo DiCaprio, and he's an incredible advocate for conservation, earth preservation, and so on. And what I like about Leonardo is that he draws on the unanimous scientific consensus about climate change being a fact. Not so the Trump presidency, which we're all facing. And we have the situation where climate change in America is swiftly being placed on the back burner and will soon, very soon, be out of the door. And Trump has dubbed climate change as a hoax created by the Chinese government to try and make US manufacturing non-competitive. Of course, this is total nonsense. But what he did in terms of establishing a cabinet, particularly how the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States would evolve, he tapped a gentleman by the name of Myron Ebell. This gentleman is America's most prominent climate change skeptic, and he was put in charge of overseeing the transition of the Environmental Protection Agency, known as EPA. And the intent was to roll back the extensive environmental platform created by the Obama administration. Myron Ebell is not a scientist. He doesn't believe in scientific facts endorsed by climate scientists. And he talks glibly about the actual benefits of climate change. This earned him the nickname climate criminal from Greenpeace. But it gets worse. Trump then selected a gentleman by the name of Scott Pruitt, who is the Attorney General in Oklahoma, and he is a huge ally of the fossil fuel industry. Now his selection, along with Ebell's oversight, will certainly destroy the US Clean Power Plan and all the other environmental measures put in place over the past 8 years. Now he proposes to open up federal lands for logging and carbon extraction, oil, gas, coal. He rejects the Paris Climate Change Accord, and conservation is not part of his vocabulary. So it's in the cards that the XL pipeline will be built. Federal parks will end up drastically diminished. Offshore drilling permits will be abundant, while conservation measures are dumped worldwide. So there's a strategic momentum engineered by these two climate change deniers. And what it does is to make America a rogue state. Its impact will destabilize global efforts to rein in climate change. Now, Myron Ebell has an organization called Competitive Enterprise Institute, but it's financed by Exxon and the coal industry. And it's part of the powerful international misinformation machine that pours millions of dollars into the campaign that discredits climate scientists. False news, false premises, financed by billionaire moguls. Now, CEI masquerades as a think tank, but it's in fact a corporate lobbying group that buys the politics that protects the interests of billionaires, who, by the way, have no concern for a sustainable environment. Now, fossil fuel interests, the corporate billionaires, greeted Trump's strategy with elation in anticipation of a new bottom line: protection of carbon profits for Trump's corporate cronies. The existence of the EPA is in fact endangered, and it's likely to be cast aside. So Trump and his acolytes give no hope for our deteriorating planet. So the recipe is in place to create disastrous global consequences. Inadvertently, I offered an antidote to all of this. I didn't realize I was doing so, but my latest book, New Planet, New World, which is just released, charts the inevitable space mission in 2080 to inhabit a new planet made necessary by the willful ignorance about climate change on planet Earth. Culture Crash late in the 21st century opens this epic novel, and children travel via spacecraft to a distant planet to escape Earth. And 2080 is close. It's not really a sci-fi book, it's a futuristic book. 2080 is close. 60 odd years to go. But I show that there's a sharing of cultures, technologies, so the children join with other refugees, and they form a new sustainable caring community with ethics and a moral compass. Now there's a galloping plot, but all the different plot lines, they arc into the epiphany of the last chapter, chapter 13. And this is the end game of a philosophy for the future. Because in this chapter, I have the inclusiveness of science, combining with Tolstoy's vision, Pope Francis's climate change encyclical, and not repeating the mistakes of the carbon cabal. And the underlying message is from Tolstoy, the conscience of humanity. And this has a lot to say to Buddhism. He described humanity's bottom line as the cultivation of love, that this was the mainspring for authentic and responsible living. Now this final chapter, which is titled Musings on the Future of Humanity, was written long before Trump ascended to the presidency in America. However, many readers of this book have pointed out that I've provided an antidote for all that Trump intends to implement. So this is going to bring me to a kind of a more poignant approach. I want to look at climate change through the eyes of a very frightened 9-year-old boy. My grandnephew James was recently celebrating his birthday. He was 9. Yet he felt awful and very sad about being 9. And he wished he could stay 5 years old forever. When asked why, he replied that if he could stay 5 forever, then the earth would not explode and burn. When he said this, and the tears welled up in his large brown eyes, he says, I don't want to grow up and live in a world that is burning. There was quite a silence after he said this, because what on earth could I say to him? I couldn't say, everything will be okay. My generation will fix things. He was much too intelligent for these kinds of placebos. So I spoke to him about the mindfulness community that we're all a part of. This was created in 1997, Pinegate. And I explained to him the deliberate steps taken at Pinegate for planetary care. We simplify, make do with less, we share and we adapt. And our intent is to create environmental leaders, and that includes him. So I said to him, why not become a leader for your generation? He thought about that. Then he asked, what else did Pinegate do? I pointed out that Pinegate encourages voluntary simplicity and community ethics as a way of life. And we start with the earth. Our organic garden produces an abundance of vegetables, apples, and flowers that are shared with neighbours and community members. And it's a special solace for me to spend time with the earth, observing bumblebees and butterflies. And I garden with assistance from my neighbourhood. They're not my children, but they're all the children I borrow in the neighbourhood. And they help me garden. They sometimes pull up things that they shouldn't pull up, but never mind. They're getting their hands dirty. And once they went into hilarious laughter, because they had seen me very carefully cultivate and pour all kinds of attention to this tomato plant. It had grown bigger and bigger, but there's no sign of any tomatoes on it. Then I suddenly realized it was a giant weed. And I had been nurturing this darn thing for about a month or so. So we all laughed at that, and that went into the compost at the back. So at the back of the garden we have a beautiful fountain that murmurs away amidst all the flowers, and the flowers are picked and the kids take them to elderly folk on our crescent. And we also have a simple underground economy arising from this sharing. People have different skills, and these are just exchanged, so there's no money involved. It's a very nice way. And there's a solar panel on the roof which fuels our hot water system. So everything here is as eco-friendly as we can make it for our 50-year-old bungalow with a meditation hall in the basement, which is exactly where you're all sitting right now. Now this eco effort has become an example for other friends, because they do the math on how much cash we are saving, and they tend to implement something similar. Our focus is on mindfulness in schools, city environment, teens at risk, and on the empowerment of women. We also have an engaged arm in terms of the Friends for Peace organization. And the empowerment of women has basically been one of the greatest things that has happened at Pinegate. And I'm blown away by the results. And I said this to James. Because at the local level, there are all these great women who are helping to make things happen. So James said incredulously, "You mean girl power?" Exactly, I replied to him. And I've written elsewhere that I believe strongly that the present millennium is the century of the daughters, not so much as a gender separate thing, but as attributes of a holistic, nurturing presence of mind. So the idea behind Pinegate from its inception is to foster a strong cadre of people in Ottawa to make a difference for the betterment of society and the Earth Mother. And it's true to say that women are in the forefront of this endeavor. And I would describe them as the heart that holds the living waters together. And that's the dynamic epicenter that leads us to effective action. And that's how we get things done to create a different course of action and living. Now James was taking all of this in. He knew instinctively that major changes were needed, and I intimated to him that if enough of us change our minds, if enough of us refine our consciousness, then we will be in charge. Then I told him about a speech I gave about violent consumption, and his sharp mind held on to every word as I pointed out that festive occasions like the one we're enjoying at the moment, Christmas, it provides opportunities for the very best and the very worst within us to come out and play. And although there is compassion and kindness, it's quickly overshadowed by greed, selfishness, and consumer madness. We have to reassess, I told him. And it's time to move on from being self-absorbed and distracted. How? He asked, and he really wanted to know. So I gave him a list. Here's how. You have to locate yourself in something bigger than who you are. A humanitarian cause, respecting the earth, making our thinking better, being kinder and more generous. How about examining our habits about gift giving? I said this to James, and he really didn't know what I was talking about. Why don't we learn to give gifts that make a difference to somebody who is not as well off as we are? And I pointed out to James that I no longer buy Christmas gifts. Instead, I present gift certificates in the names of family, grandchildren, and young neighborhood friends. And these certificates provide items like education for a girl in Afghanistan, microloans for female-led families, rebuilding forests in Haiti, literacy packages, supporting Habitat for Humanity, building houses for the destitute. These gifts are bigger than our self-absorbed egos, and they create happiness and relief for less fortunate people. And I related to James that my grandchildren proudly take their Christmas certificates to school for show and tell periods, and they play it forward with their classmates and teachers. And one boy who lives on this crescent, just over the road, he has received these kinds of gifts from me over a number of years. Now, for his most recent birthday, he asked all his friends not to give him presents, but to bring a donation for the Ottawa Humane Society that looks after hurt animals. Now, all of his friends brought donations, a splendid sum of $180. They all went together to the Humane Society and happily handed over their bag of cash to the very surprised staff. Now, other children in the neighborhood have followed suit. They do similar things. They get a whole bunch of piles. 1/3 goes to CHIO, 1/3 goes to other hospitals, and they keep 1/3 for themselves. And this isn't the parents asking them to do this. It's just that, okay, they've caught on to the fact that, okay, they have so much, then there are so many children that do not. This resonated with young James, my grandnephew. And he said, yep, I can do that with my ice hockey team. My dad's the coach, so he would help. Then he waited for me to carry on. He was a very intelligent and smart little boy. And I said to him, James, the greatest gift we can give to ourselves and others at this time of global crises is sharing and caring. It involves stepping onto what the Buddhists call the Bodhisattva path. James knows that I'm a Zen teacher. I explained that a Bodhisattva was a person who stayed in the global mess and did their best to awaken the minds and hearts of people. And I firmly stated that it's the time for the Bodhisattva within us to enter the 21st century as the example for action. It takes training, practice, smartness, and creative vision. Then James almost floored me with his next question. You mean like Jedi training? And I nodded with a smile, and I referred briefly to my years of training in ashrams and monasteries in India and France, and with Native American medicine people. But I confided that the real kicker for me was the time spent alone in the Canadian wilderness. And I promised to talk to him about that at some future time. Then he asked me, so what's the big deal about violent consumption? I replied that it totally dominates our planet, our mind, and our body. And I knew what James's fears were about. His greatest fear was about the planet's ecological crises, from mining disasters in Brazil and China, wildfires in Canada's boreal forests, Amazon deforestation, all the way to the Gulf oil spill. He worried about this and the devastation to the planet. And he said to me, how do we change this madness, this destruction of the planet? And I wondered how best to explain matters to him, but I trusted his intelligence. So I said to him, we must come to a stop. We have to learn how to do that. We must locate ourselves in stillness and make different choices by examining our minds, by looking carefully at our consumption patterns, and then see how we actually participate in creating these terrible disasters that upset us. I noted that this kind of awareness takes us back to what we do with our minds. By this time, James had a one-line mantra. Okay, but how? So I started. You can start by making good friends with your breath, just as we did at the silent meditation before this Dharma talk. You bring your focus to your in-breath, then to your out-breath, with full attention to your breath. You're concentrating. And what your breath does, it allows you to soften. It allows you to be still and clear. And I said, okay, do you want to try it with me? So he did. So we did 10 in-breaths, 10 out-breaths. Then he nodded and grinned with agreement. He said, yeah, I can feel the difference. And I said, it's the concentration, your full attention to the breath that makes the difference. Normally, we don't care about our breath. It just comes and goes and it's there. That's why we live. But he found that the actual focus, full attention on the breath is what makes difference. And that's the secret to so much in meditation. If you can have that full attention on breath, when things go wrong, when you're upset, when you're out of your depth, you stop. Full attention on in-breath, full attention on out-breath. 10 times. Then you'll have some clarity about the situation you're in. And I told James that we do know how to reduce our ecological footprint. We also know that taking care of the earth and taking care of the oceans takes care of ourselves. But we have to begin it now. Because the future is just our tomorrow. And our future is shaped by the actions that we take. So I looked at James and said, okay, that's enough for now. You got enough to digest. But he yelled at me, no, I want to hear more. Keep talking. So I did as I was told. I couldn't turn away from his eagerness. He had really latched on to what I was saying. So I mentioned to him that if rampant consumption remains our deepest desire, we'll have a degraded planet that will certainly blow up. I said, James, your fears are correct. Events like Valentine's Day, Easter, Christmas, Mother's Day, and so on, these are targeted by the captains of industry for optimal retail returns. Mindless consumerism is fueled to the max. You just have to watch the videos of, is it Black Friday shopping in the States and in Canada? It's a zoo. And also at Christmas, where we're treading now, we're far removed from remembering the significance of this very spiritual celebration. So endless economic growth, which is the mantra of modern civilization, this provides a promise of expectations being met without any awareness of consequences for our health or the health of the planet. So I said to him, our current non-sustainable energy and economic systems, they're subsystems of a global ecology that's disintegrating. And this is what's making you upset. So if we do not begin to simplify, make do with less and change, then the vicious downward spiral to a burning world, which you're afraid of, this would definitely occur. Then I said to him, do you know there's also violence to our bodies through the food we eat? And that it has disastrous consequences for our connection to all living beings? He did not know this. But his mind was a sponge, soaking up every word. And I've discovered from his mum and dad that everything that I said to him on this day, he's repeated to them, to his grandparents, to his schoolmates. So he's quite a broadcaster. So I was telling him about the violence to our bodies through the food we eat. I said the vast consumption of meat and alcohol is a huge and excessive ecological footprint. Industrial animal agriculture is not really farming as we like to think about farming. Animals are treated solely as economic commodities and subjected to horrible cruelty. The stress, despair and anger generated in the animals are the energies we consume when they end up on our plate. We're eating their suffering and pain, taking it into every cell of our bodies and consciousness. Ugh, that's so gross, said James. But I told him we can even change our minds about our patterns of food consumption. We just re-educate. We retrain ourselves mentally. And we choose to support our body and planet by shifting ingrained food habits that we've learned through time. It takes training to step more lightly on the planet. It means reducing as much as possible the violence, the destruction, and the suffering that we bring to living creatures and to the planet. And I said it's simple. If we bring violence into our own biological system and consciousness, then we inevitably bring violence to everything we connect to. James then asked me a very deep question. I said, is this your Buddhism? I grinned at him. I said, well, yes, yeah, but the Buddha was very smart. He taught that the world is always burning, but is burning with the fires of greed, anger and foolishness. And his advice was simple: drop such dangers as soon as possible. What the Buddha taught was that it was the unskillful speech, selfish feelings, negative mental formations, and badass consciousness that burned the world. James immediately laughed. Did the Buddha really use the word badass? I said no. I said that's my embellishment. But I pointed out that the Hopi people that I talked about in previous times, they also referred to the world is burning as a state of imbalance, known as koyaanisqatsi. And we're not the first people to experience this imbalance. The difference today and the vast destruction of the planet that's occurring is that without our commitment to wise information, we might be the last people to experience this. Then he came on to a topic that we had talked about before. So he said, is climate change our basic problem then? And I paused for a moment before replying. James, the basic issue is whether we can adapt to climate change. You know about the 2015 Paris Accord on climate change because we've discussed it before. James nodded. This 2015 Accord was an exceptional step by the international community dedicating their intent to prevent global temperature from rising a further 1.5 degrees. The signatories returned to their respective countries to find the wherewithal to change climate change. But something was missing from the deliberations and the press releases. And what was missing was a candid recognition of the cascade effect, which is a well-known notion in ecological science. You have tipping points in sea level rise and temperature. That connects to tipping points in air pollution, which connect to tipping points in polar ice melt, boreal forest wildfires, and triggers further tipping points that create deforestation, desertification, and so on in a relentless cascade that cannot be stopped. I reminded him of the wildfires in Alberta. And I said, this was not a singular disaster at Fort McMurray, as the entire boreal forest in Canada is a tinderbox due to the powerful forces of climate change. The reality in front of us is not the reversal of climate change. The question is learning, how do we adapt to the consequences of climate change? And I emphasized to James that the disasters all over the world interconnect and reinforce each potency to explode. Whether it's wildfires, floods, landslides, volcanic eruptions, hurricanes, you name it. We could go on endlessly. But the media and news reporters that I totally despise, it's a very unnoble profession to be a journalist these days. They report on the drama and the hype of terrible things happening worldwide, but they rarely tell the truth that, okay, here is another manifestation of climate change. Their bosses, who are playthings of corporate moguls, are silenced. Reporters are silenced, by and large. And wouldn't it be far more truthful if reporters would just say, here we have another manifestation of climate change. But that kind of honesty is something that Trump and his two climate change deniers who are hell-bent on destroying the Environmental Protection Agency, they are knocking truth out of the equation. And I said, what we have to really realize, James, that news programs are often showbiz and false news, fake. That journalists function as pawns to corporate interests that are culpable in the first place for creating the tipping points that cause these interconnected disasters. And I said to him, the disasters worldwide are all interconnected. They're not kind of random, they're not isolated, they are interconnected. But the thing that's really upsetting is that the general public, like you, like me, they're not educated by the media about the terrible realities happening on our planet. When we go to read about something or listen to something on the news or in the newspapers, there's always a thing at the back of our mind. Is this true? Is this reporter telling the truth, or is he telling us what the powers that be want him to say or her to say? So it's a huge obstacle because we rely on the media to give us information. But there are other obstacles preventing the general public taking wise action. And this is a mixture of fear, despair, sheer laziness, disempowerment, and a sense of utter hopelessness. I said, now listen to this, James. There's a phrase going around the world. What on earth can I do to make a difference? This is followed by another phrase. So why should I do anything? And that's where so many people are. They are aware of the disasters, but they're frozen about taking action. And I said, there's certainly global awareness, but also fear about our future place on planet Earth. And surely you can understand this, James, because that's why you want to live for 5 years, at 5 years old, forever, because you don't want to see it. The difficult thing for you to grasp is the clear evidence that you and I are the primary causes, and people like us. So what are we going to do? And I confessed to James that in my previous books, I had underestimated the impact of the carbon fuel cabal. This is a complex web of very powerful corporate and government interests, most of whom are in Trump's new cabinet. And this carbon economy extends into the manufacturing and servicing sector. It's supported by insulated financial institutions that control marketing and advertising. It's all tied up. It's all wrapped up. Now, this collective power, when extended into the media, has made science and ecology into public enemy number one. Now, this powerful, intermeshed cabal of billionaire boat moguls, they can circumvent climate change accords agreed to by any international community. People everywhere are aware, but they just feel helpless in the face of this overwhelming power. So what are we to do? And James shrugged in exasperation. Here's the thing, I said. In terms of action, we now have clear, data-based evidence that we must cut back, make do with less, and implement a lifestyle of voluntary simplicity. So where do we start? Of course, we must think globally and be aware of the bigger picture and step beyond the smaller pictures of ourselves created by fear and disempowerment. But we also can act locally with great vigor in our families and communities. And James was an incredible example of spreading everything I had said to him, to his mum and dad. And in fact, his mum said, "Ian, do you know what kind of fire you've lit under James?" And I said, yeah. I said, he might transform your house. And I think he has. But we can do a great many things in our families and communities. And then our intentions spread like pebbles dropped into still water. Because we have to hold officials, politicians, and corporate culture to account. And we alert the political and corporate decision makers that we mean business as voters and consumers, deeply concerned about the planet and our location on it. I said, this is very important. I then continued to talk to James on a more personal note. James, the challenge for me is to be in society, but as a still island of mindfulness. Take small steps at first, then larger ones. We just need to make essential changes in energy use, in our diet, our language, media, and outreach. And voluntary simplicity is a good starting place. It means making deliberate choices about how we spend time and money, rather than living on the automatic pilot of busyness. We support environmental causes with the excess stuff in the basement. Always thinking about whether we really need to buy something more. Enjoy being simple. Live modestly by shifting our perceptions just a little bit. But just look deeply into what we do with time, money, clutter, and our choices, and change. Then see whether the consequences are peace and happiness for you. Then the world will follow. I told him a bit more about the futuristic book I'd written, New Planet, New World, because this provides a counterpoint story to the demise of modern civilization. It's a sort of a solution in a novel, which is fiction, but it's fiction that's rather close to the bone. I told him that in the book we've got a communal hero's journey to reconstruct society based on ecology, caring and sharing. And the final chapter muses about human survival anywhere. And the drive is to create a tangible spirit of cooperation, the willingness to share, and the supportive intuition to cross the bridges of misunderstanding. There's always going to be misunderstandings. There's always going to be a clash of interests. But we have to be prepared to cross the bridge, talk and understand. But what we've got on the earth at the moment, the rich and the uber wealthy already inhabit armed, gated communities. And they will be targets. In Trump Tower, New York City has to defend Donald Trump at the cost of $1 million a day. That's a gated community for you. But sooner or later, they will become open targets for eco-militias and popular uprisings drawn from the impoverished masses. And they are intent on revenge. Then I asked him, have you ever seen Stanley Kubrick's film, The Clockwork Orange? This is a bit dated. And he said, no, he hadn't. And I told him, perhaps it's just as well, because this was a gruesome movie. And the problem is that it could well emerge in the real world. Now, to avoid this likely outcome, I said to him, we have to take training very, very seriously. All of this is to do an end run around the toxic mixture of fear, despair, laziness, and hopelessness. Wow. That's all that James said. He said, wow. Okay, I get it about training, but what does it look like? I was impressed by his intelligence, but I was hesitant to talk to him about what I was thinking. And he must have read my mind, because he said, okay, just lay it out for me. And I did. And I started to talk to him about gardening in the mind. And I said, you're not going to like the first one. And I wagged my finger at him and I said, you learn to be quiet and silent. And use the breath techniques I've been talking to you about. And this was the first of 8 simple steps to refine the mind and then engage differently. And I sort of simplified it for James, but this is basically a recipe within Buddhism or within any faith. So you learn to be silent and quiet. You make time and space for spiritual practice at home and throughout your daily schedule. Number 2, create a stress reduction menu and subtract the weeds in the garden of your mind. Do you all resonate with that? Stress reduction menu. Subtract the weeds in your mind. Clean up your garden. 3. Be determined to meditate daily. Do the weeding every day. Then focus and soften your heart. Cultivate the soil of your mind's garden. Number 5. Cultivate these seeds of mindfulness at home, school, work, or in solitude every day. Cultivate them just a little bit. Number 6. Simplify. Make do with less. Declutter your mind and your home. 7, and this is really important, taste the fruits of your practice. Is doing all of this stuff making you clear? Is it helping you reach out? Do you feel better because of it? Ask yourself these questions. And then 8, with all of this work done, you then engage with the world. James by this time had pulled out his tablet and he was typing all of this down as I continued talking. Our ways of living together, caring for environmental, political and economic realms must all be reconstructed. And the only ones who can reconstruct it is you and me and everyone else individually. I assured James that we have the capacity to transform the mind. I said this is possible. But finding stillness and inner silence is a necessary first step. If you don't have that, if you can't create that, forget it. You have to deliberately create that space to be still and silent. That's the beginning point. Because then the simple exercise of full attention to breath goes deeper and deeper. And it makes you smarter. And I also said this kind of program, we also find it easier in everyday life. It's easier to close down. This kind of program helps us not to close down. It helps us to open up our hearts. So the remedy is within reach. There's just some work to do. And this is what I mean by organic gardening in the mind. And I said this is a very important tenet or principle of Buddhism. So I paused for a moment to find the words to bring our conversation to an end. You might ask this, why do all this stuff, James? Why should we do this stuff? Here's why. When you can be open and receptive as a result of doing this 8-fold step program, when you can be open and receptive, you become a sort of epicenter of light and energy for others. You just light up things for other people without really doing anything. It's just who you've become. And also, when you learn how to sit with pain, because things are going to happen that are going to upset you. You're going to be devastated by this, that, and the other. But if you can sit with that pain, come face to face with what hurts, breathing in and breathing out, the sting recedes as you calm. If you start to close down, you'll be intelligent enough to ask, do I really want to take a pass on happiness? Always let go once you feel you're closing down or clinging. Then I said to him, you know something? I've got a fridge magnet at home. This was given to me by my friend Eve. It has let go or be dragged in capital letters. I said, I look at this fridge magnet every day and I take the message to heart with a quiet smile. Let go or be dragged. I said, it's essential to learn to be silent, to stop clinging, and find the way to be present not distracted, not on your cell phone all the time, even if all your buddies are. You have to learn how to be present and see how different that feels. How do you feel when you're being present? How sharp is your intuition? How gentle are your words? To make this possible, we have to learn to be silent, to stop clinging, and find the way to be present. And I said, and you can come and talk to me whenever you like. But the Hopi, who are very, very wise, they advise us, learn to never take anything personally and look around to see who is with you. It's very important, because the people who are with you and around you impact you. So you have to be careful about who you hang out with. Now, as you do all of this, I said to him, then the world changes as a consequence. Now, this destination is well worth it, don't you think? And he nodded in agreement. I assured James that we're equal to the task, and I chose not to hold back anything from him during this long conversation on his birthday. He's an unusually bright boy, and he asked questions and demanded clarifications. Yet I knew he had grasped what I'd said. And he came up to me as I was leaving, and he whispered in my ear that my chat with him was his best birthday present ever. But you've probably intuited that my conversation with young James was all about engaged Buddhism, the essential teachings of the Buddha. Now, engaged Buddhism is a modern term coined by Thich Nhat Hanh to remind Buddhists that the Buddha's teachings were always based on engaged Buddhism. In the past, there was too much attention on forging feudal structures to support monasteries in the East, and the foundation of engaged Buddhism got lost. So it's up to us to revive engaged Buddhism and live it in every moment of our lives. And if you've connected the dots of my conversation with James, you would see clearly that engaged Buddhism is the antidote to all that Donald Trump stands for. Thank you for listening to me.